Hello, everyone watching us online. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion, AI as a new frontier for journalism. I hope you enjoyed the debate. We are super excited to have a great panel of speakers who will be introduced later. For those of you who are joining for the first time, this is a third event of our discussion series, DAIDALOS, which is named after the Greek innovator. We look at the social dimensions of AI research and the impact it has on everyday lives. I'm really happy that this idea for the series was born in the minds of our PhD students, that is the students of AI Center at the Czech Technical University in Prague, because it shows that young people care deeply about what scientists leave behind for future generations. We have 3 more events coming up, so follow our social media to be among the first ones to find out about them. Today, we will discuss the world of journalism and how it is affected by AI innovations. And I'm thrilled that Anna Vošalíková from Český rozhlas, which is the Czech radio, agreed to host our discussion. She's the chief producer of the radio's audio platform and specializes in innovative audio content, new formats, and audio narratives driven by AI. In my opinion, she's the best person to moderate the debate with today's topic. So I won't delay it any longer. And Aničko, the floor is yours.
Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Carolina, for the introduction. I'm super excited to be here. I hope we're going to be having a fairly lively debate, and I'm excited to introduce the speakers that we have today. We have Logan Williams of Bellingcat. He's a data scientist with a background in cartography and data visualization. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Logan. And we have Jan Drchal, who is a machine learning researcher and lecturer at the AI Center of the Faculty of Electrical Engineering. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. If you do ever see me looking down, please be advised that I'm just looking at my notes. I'm not particularly sad. If you have any questions whatsoever, please leave them in the Slido or in the YouTube comment section. I believe I'm saying this correctly, and we'll be sure to answer. There we go. That's where you should leave your questions, and we'll be sure to answer them after each short block of today's discussion. We've decided to split it into 3 separate parts. After each part, there'll be space for your questions, which we will be all excited to answer. The first section is going to be AI as part of the day-to-day work of our 2 distinguished guests. The second part will be the ethical dilemmas that are obviously always a topic when speaking about artificial intelligence and AI-based systems in general. And the third part is going to be AI as part of our future, maybe an integral one, maybe not. We'll see where the discussion takes us. So my first question for both of you would be, how has your perception of AI changed over time, from the time when you started working with it all the way to where you are now? Logan, take it away.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. I think that if I can summarize kind of one broad transition in the way that I've thought about and see AI around me today, it's that it's become far more prosaic, or that the more impactful places where AI has created a change in the real world have been more prosaic than I would have expected. And I think kind of a good example of this maybe is, a year or 2 ago, there was a huge media furor over deepfakes, and this idea that deepfake technology would create this overwhelming kind of amount of false information and false videos. And I think broadly speaking, there have been exceptions, but broadly speaking, that hasn't quite played out as a primary driver of misinformation in the media sphere. And instead, what has been driving a lot of the spread of misinformation are things like algorithmic timelines and recommended content, and these sorts of ways that these recommendation-driven systems, which of course is a type of artificial intelligence and statistical analysis to try to create an intelligent recommendation for what a user is likely to interact with on a website. These systems have been far more impactful, despite getting a lot less media attention as they're developed and rolled out and in fact, in the view of the general public, not always being seen as artificial intelligence at all.
Jan?
I've seen it everywhere these days, really. From if I go back to time where when I started to be interested actually in research, then in those times, the artificial intelligence mostly used in practical lives was maybe some kind of route planning algorithms and these kinds, and these days it's really everywhere. I really can't imagine these days without highly sophisticated internet search, for example, because this is really super important. The recommendation systems, which Logan mentioned, this is something which really helps, but it has the other side also. I mean, collecting data on people and sharing these data between companies, of course. But if used well, then I think this is great tool, really. Yeah, and then there are more and more, and with improving methods and available data, I think these days we're mostly dealing with new things coming from machine learning. So you have these highly sophisticated things like question answering. So you ask Google what is the highest mountain there, and you get your answer and document where it comes from. And we'll see where it gets us in the future. But yeah.
Logan, are you satisfied with this development?
Satisfied is an interesting word. I think that with most of technology in general, once the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, it's not going back in. And I think all of these AI and machine learning systems that have integrated themselves into our day-to-day life are here to stay. I have been happy to see increasing public awareness of some of the limitations and inherent biases of some of these systems, but I think we'll probably be getting to that discussion a little bit later in the conversation.
We absolutely will. Now, my next question kind of ties in what has already been said, but what is, from the recent years, let's say, your favorite application of any AI-based algorithm that you've worked with or that you've seen used? Yeah.
I guess for me it's that internet search, because I use it all the time, all day long, searching papers and whatever my hobbies, and yeah, so for me it's the greatest tool, I guess.
Logan?
Well, now Jan's making me think I should say internet search because I would be completely lost without it. But kind of related to internet search, an AI algorithm that we've been excitedly using more of at Bellingcat and find really potentially interesting for journalism is some of the, not in academic terms super recent, but fairly recent developments in doing word, sentence, and document embeddings. And these have, I think, a lot of potential for making large quantities of text, which we often have to work with in doing analyses of things like disinformation on the internet, much easier to process and find patterns in. And I'm especially excited by some of the multilingual document embeddings that researchers have come up with that can allow the content of information to be compared directly between multiple languages. And especially in a world where information might start in English and then be translated into multiple different languages as that spreads across the world. I think it's really exciting to have tools that help us look at this in a multilingual way, especially because a lot of natural language processing up to this point has had a strong English focus, which makes doing non-English analysis generally much more difficult.
I'm very excited that you basically asked the next question for me, because we are going to get to natural language processes, and the next question is for Jan, who has recently been working a lot with natural language processes, especially for low resource languages. And for you, Jan, I want to know, what is the biggest challenge that you face in this research, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so we deal with the low resource languages, so with Czech, and well, in this case, the situation is not worst, but it's at the same time it's not best. So we're really struggling with small data, and also because these days you typically work with some based on pre-trained models, which is extremely computationally intensive. You need lots of computational power to get these models. I mean, in our for our things, we work with these language models. So there are also some problems with having the top of the line algorithms, these pre-trained models. But I must say that in few past years, this is getting infinitely better, because there are some really good multilingual models which are trained on like 100 languages. So we use these quite a lot. And also there's a constant influx of data. So if I should talk for Czech language, there are like 3 large language models which were published in past years. So there was the CERT from Západočeská Univerzita, and then UFAL at Matfis has published like 2 other models which are really very well prepared for what we do. Yeah, and the biggest problem is the availability of data. Me personally and my team, we focus on something called automatic fact checking. So our task is to take a textual claim, and we have a large database of a large corpus of texts of which is considered to be correct, and we kind of evaluate these claims against these databases. And yeah, there exist some data sets for English, obviously, for our language and other low resource languages. It's much harder. So once again, we are dealing with multilingual models. We use machine translation, but we also basically we started last year. We collect our own data sets, while the open data are based on, or open data sets or openly published data sets are based on Wikipedia. We really focus on journalists, on newspaper articles. So this is kind of different type of language used. Also, we're trying to get, because we need to build some really training data to get some more complex and more realistic claims to train these systems. So yeah, so there is definitely a problem with the lower resource, but there's definitely in this area I'm dealing with, I think there's overworked problem of not having enough data and high quality data. This is other thing, and we're trying to deal with it.
We'll definitely get to talking a little bit more about the automated fact-checking system that you're working on, based solely on the fact that my colleagues made sure that I would ask you about it, because they're very excited about it here at Czech Radio. So that's always good to have a chance to speak with you about it. But Logan, I want to know, the stories that we see online that are heavily data-driven are very often based around geography or demographic clusters. Why do you think that's the case?
I think this is a really good question, and it's one that I have to say, before you asked it, I haven't necessarily interrogated that much in myself, partially because my background is cartography, so of course maps are a natural thing for someone that likes maps to make. But I think that there's some reasons why this is the case. One has to do with readers. And I think readers like maps in general as well. People like to take stories that they read, especially stories that have a lot of numbers and data in them, and put it into a local context that makes sense in their own life. And I think maps often make this easier than it would be otherwise. And some of the interactive tools that I know the New York Times does a lot, but other large media organizations with the budget to develop interactives do as well, where you can enter in your zip code or your postcode and see data that's tailored to your specific area. I think people like that level of being able to personally see what the larger scale data story means for the places that they know very well. I also think that it's oftentimes the most available format for types of data that you might want to cross-correlate with other variables that wouldn't otherwise be in the data set, other than through this kind of geographic region as a proxy for connecting them. So you mentioned demographics, and I think oftentimes we might want to, this is a totally hypothetical example, but maybe look at how school budgets correlate with demographics. And it's oftentimes not possible to get this information directly because there's the cross-tabulation of demographics and budgets just isn't there or isn't published in a public way. But if you can get the information on school budgets by geography, and you have information on demographics by geography, the geography can kind of serve as a bridge to find these patterns that otherwise there might not be data available for.
Magic. Now would be the time for any questions if we have. If there are any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them now. If we do not have any questions yet, we do. For Jan, what kind of texts do you use for constructing your database? Is there something like a bad text in terms of training algorithms?
Well, bad text. Well, you're dealing with really corpora of text which are somehow checked, or basically our current data set we are dealing with is based on CZK, which is Czech news agency corpus of their news from 2000 to 2020, if I'm not wrong. It's about 3 million articles. And bad text in this case might be something we want to filter out from this, which is we're currently not dealing with things like tabular data. So we just filter these out. But because this system is basically, well, a large part of the system is based on document retrieval, where we find relevant documents to prove or disprove the claims. So if this was meant something like negative examples, this is not a thing we do have here. Obviously, there are problems when building these data sets where you actually need to have these claims to be proven or disproven, that these might not be really realistic. These might not be something a person would ask, but we kind of dealing with this by checking the collected data, instructing the annotators, which, by the way, we're cooperating with Faculty of Social Sciences, with students of journalism led by Václav Moravec. So, for 3 semesters, every semester we do data collection with these students, and we are kind of improving the methodology. So, if bad text was meant like negative examples, we don't need them, but we still need to have clean data, and the overall method of collecting them is quite complicated. Okay, so
Magic. So we have one more question. Do you think NLP, especially in languages other than English, is advanced enough to allow for automated fact-checking, identifying misinformation online? Maybe Jan, again, take it away.
I think these days we don't have enough data, but what I think is important. Well, we're working on automated fact-checking system, but it has basically two parts. Okay, the output of such system might be this claim is supported, this is refuted, or we don't have enough information. But it's really not enough for people to use it. We feel it more as being as an assistive technology. So what's really important is if the system somehow decides whether the claim is right or wrong, it always supports with evidence, which I mean is set of and reasonable a set of documents of reasonable size, so this user or journalist can skim through them and know things. So this first part, basically, this document retrieval, or it's something very similar to that, because it's influenced by the claim veracity, is something we can do quite well. Really, it works well. The other part of really inferring or telling whether it's whether the claim is supported by these documents or not is more complicated in Czech. We have some results, but it's ongoing work, so we will deal with that in future years. But I think the most important part still is this kind of semantic search, which is finding the documents which might help you to support or refute any claim. And this is something we think can be made working in low resource languages.
Logan, did you want to add anything?
I would just add that from my experience so far, I definitely don't think it's there yet. And I was also I was happy to hear Jan say that it would be kind of an assistive technology is how he's thinking about the development of this, because I think especially when you have something as important as fact checking, I think it will be important to keep a human in the loop for the foreseeable future, just to make sure that there is a set of human eyes validating the quality of anything that might be taken by a reader as a verified fact.
So that would be it for the questions for round one. There'll be 2 more rounds for questions, so don't worry if you've not had a chance to place your question just yet. The next portion of the debate will be around the ethics of artificial intelligence. And I'm sure all of us as people who deal with artificial intelligence, who research or use artificial intelligence, we've all had to answer to some extent some questions surrounding the ethics, surrounding everything concerning the ethical aspect or dimension of artificial intelligence. So my first question, and it's a bit of a broad one again, is do you personally, either one of you, have any personal reservations towards using artificial intelligence in your work or consuming content created by artificial intelligence? Logan.
Yeah, I think I definitely do have reservations towards AI. I think one of the biggest ones I personally have is the way that artificial intelligence technology can support a kind of mass surveillance of citizenry that wasn't necessarily possible before. And I think this is perhaps especially true right now for facial recognition, which is good enough to track people's movements on a fairly wide scale if it's deployed to do so. And we have had some lively internal debates at Bellingcat about the ethics of using facial recognition, even when we're explicitly trying to do something that's in the public interest. For example, to identify the people that were involved in the January 6th, 2021 storming of the US Capitol in Washington, DC, where there's lots of footage of these people, and you can use facial recognition to very quickly identify kind of common suspects in particular crimes that happened. But the extent to which that is also participating in the same kind of use of technology that's potentially leading authoritarian governments to have an easier job cracking down on dissident journalists and that sort of thing is definitely, I think, a matter of concern, not something that obviously invalidates any use of the technology, but something that I think practitioners definitely need to be conscious of.
Jan?
For me, okay, I totally agree with Logan on this. For me, it's I'm kind of scared of blindly following what these AI systems tell us. For at least at certain areas, well, I'm thinking on core decisions or medicine, So, and I think it's important. There's a lot of research in that in explainable AI. So I think at least for certain areas, really, we need to have these explanations in order to really somehow act upon outputs of these systems. So I think this is very important because I know there is certain people who really blindly trust into this new technology, and in some cases this is not really a good idea, I think. But on the other hand, there are lots of applications of AI, so to say, not such critical applications where we can really gain a lot of. But in these critical applications, I think we must deal well with explainability. Also, well, as most things these days are based on data and training data sets, then we must be really careful about introducing any kind of biases into the data. So this is also quite large discipline, not mine, but I think this is very important from the ethical point of view to really deal with this. And I think the government somehow needs to regulate this if the world around is really more and more using or exploiting these technologies. So we probably need to have some at least pointers of how this should work and what is allowed kind of data we can use or share. So yeah.
I think all of this ties quite nicely into my next question, because both of you create open source resources for journalists or assistive tech for journalists. How likely is it for these open source materials and sources to be misused to create misinformation? So basically, how likely is it for someone to create a false narrative using these open source resources? And then is maybe the fact checking that you, Jan, are working on the natural answer to, if AI can create these misnarratives, it can also fact check them in the end. So first of all, how likely is it to create false narratives using open source assistive tech for journalists? So I don't know, Logan, maybe take it away.
Sure. I would say that in general, that would not be my primary concern. I think it's important to make sure that you're releasing tools responsibly and not making the lives of anyone that wants to spread disinformation easier. But I think with this technology in general, you kind of have to assume that whatever exists in the open source world is just as developed and likely much more developed by the kinds of large corporations or state level actors that might have kind of more concerning implications for how it could be used.
Jan, any thoughts?
Well, on this, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, everything might be misused, I guess. Well, even our system, if it's if you take its skeleton and use some kind of corpus which is modified in a way that it may propagate fake news. So it's completely doable, and well, but it needs quite a lot of knowledge to get it working. But it's definitely possible to.
Have you, Jan, encountered? Sorry, someone,
No,
Logan, you
sorry.
wanted to mention something? No, Jan, have you encountered any skepticism towards the fact-checking algorithm that you're working on?
Yeah, definitely, because mostly what we presented was like half a year ago, and well, the results are typically, at least at that time, were not that great, I would say. So people rather say, okay, I'll use Google search to find this information instead. That's one thing. Also, as we are kind of presenting this to certain people, so I mean journalists, they really don't want to typically to invest time into helping us training these systems, even like not thinking about this as an investment in future, because definitely we need some feedback. We need to know what's wrong with that, what works. Okay, we need also some annotations typically, but this is kind of problem that mostly these journalists would expect that we will give them something which works 100% and it's okay and they can use it just right now. But we're missing this like cooperation on that, because we're experts in machine learning, not in writing and understanding texts, and so this needs really cooperation between various domains.
This is a little bit of a hypothetical, but I'm going to try it anyways. Do you, Logan, suppose that if there was an article written on Bellingcat published, and it was attributed to, say, you and an algorithm, do you think that the reception of an article that has this particular authorship would be different than if it was just you?
Perhaps. I think to some extent there already are lots of collaborations with algorithms that are used. I think when we publish an article that's about doing a statistical analysis on a large data set to show some point that can only be made through data sets, that is in some way a collaboration with an algorithm. It doesn't usually help very much with the actual writing the language of the text bit, but I mean, maybe it would get a byline if it could in the future. So I think I would like to believe that as long as we would continue to be very transparent about how technology was used in the research that we do, as we try to always be, that the reception would more or less stay the same. I think people are, when you're transparent about how technology is used, people are much more willing to trust it than if they don't know if something was written by a machine or by a person.
The reason I'm asking is because at Czech Radio, we recently published the Digital Author Project, which was a project of short stories written by artificial intelligence, and the reception was wildly different than to our normal audio short stories. Who would have guessed? So that's why I'm asking whether the case would be the same elsewhere. Now would be the second round of questions. So if you have any questions for us concerning either the previous panel or some ethical dilemmas that you yourself might have, we have quite a few. Question for Logan. What are the skills that folks with tech backgrounds can learn from journalists and vice versa in order to build ethical new products?
That's a really great question. I think for both technologists and journalists. The important thing is to be in the same room together and to be having conversations about your work and talking to people with very different backgrounds than what you might know. I think oftentimes people with technical backgrounds might believe that a new, shinier technical tool for a particular task is the right thing to enable a journalist to be able to do their work more effectively, when the problems that a journalist might be facing day to day are very different. And I think conversations can help that. And vice versa, I think that journalists sometimes have a limited understanding of where the limits are of technology to answer certain questions or to help with certain tasks, or the biases and blind spots of algorithms. And having those conversations between people with very different backgrounds is the best way to achieve some sort of mutual understanding there.
Thank you so much. We have a question for Jan. Do you think human decision makers are better in explainability, bias and noise, and regulations could be good enough to solve it instead of create new ones?
Well, I see the regulations there. Maybe I would think more about guidelines, because, if we like to define some regulations on how to, for example, how to collect data and share them, as I said already, then it's a very hard task, and it basically takes us back to why I think like AI and machine learning were developed for, because we were not able to describe everything by rules. So, for example, machine learning is a kind of sidestep to this. So we say, okay, we don't know how to describe these very complex systems, but instead we give you a set of examples and some, for example, some targets. So I think writing really regulations, like hard regulation, what is and what is not really possible to do with data and models, trained models, is kind of going back, trying to make these rules. So I would rather see. I would rather be. I would be happier for some guidelines, because the problem is that, for example, being a data scientist, I'm probably not that. I haven't spent that much time thinking about ethics. But if you give me some guidelines, what I should take care of, or when dealing with this data and models, when these are connected to real living people, and I could affect them, that this might be really helpful. I think the exact regulations, to state them, it's very hard to. It's like training very complex model by giving rules, not giving examples.
Thank you so much. And then we have a question for the both of you. How do you feel about the AI alignment field? I feel like it's closely connected to the ethical part of research, but also seems a little restrictive. Logan, any thoughts?
I am relatively unfamiliar with AI alignment as a field in general. I understand it's related to AI safety. I would say, for the most part, this I haven't seen this concern as much outside of academic contexts. So I'm not sure it's entirely jumped to the industry of journalism as it's practiced quite yet.
Jan, do you want to add anything?
I don't understand the question. What's meant by the restrictiveness? Definitely, some parts of AI are really highly connected to ethics, but I guess I don't get a question.
Maybe the person that wrote this question, if you'd like to elaborate on it, we can definitely readdress it at the end of the discussion and see if you can maybe find a different way to put it so we can maybe get our heads around it a little bit better. But if that's it for the questions for round 2, then we can move on to the last section of the discussion today, and that will be AI as an integral part of the future. At the beginning, we established that there was a trend in the development of AI. There was a certain simplicity that was present in the AI discourse today. Do you suppose that this development will continue? That is the path and the trajectory that is just going to be prevalent in the future? Jan?
Yes, at least for sometimes, yes, but I think that we're waiting for new things, changes of paradigms in machine learning and artificial intelligence, because now it's all about more computational power, bigger data sets. And I feel that this kinds of does not mimic how people work, how people function. So, but this is really hard to give any dates when this will happen, whether it will happen. But I guess this is something which is in future for us. So, yeah.
Logan?
Yeah, I would see things continuing in the direction that they have been broadly. I would hope that there will continue to be conversations around the ethics of data collection, and perhaps some continued interventions around personal data and how, especially companies, but also states, are able to collect and use that personal data. I think the EU, of course, set kind of the high watermark for personal data protection with the GDPR, but I think that's hopefully just the beginning of some stronger personal data rights that might perhaps impact how much data is available for these AI systems to use in the future.
And Logan, in your opinion, how tight-knit is the ideal cooperation between a journalist such as yourself and artificial intelligence in order to absolutely maximize and get the best out of both of you?
I think it should be pretty tight-knit. I personally see a lot of value in assistive systems that can, for instance, work with a journalist to make certain aspects, like, for instance, sourcing a reference to a particular statement, as I think Jan said he's working on, or finding a particular type of misinformation needle in a very large haystack of data that you've collected. These types of things can be done manually, but they're very tedious. And I think when you have a close cooperation between an AI system and a real human journalist, you get the best of both worlds and taking advantage of the things that computers are very good at doing, like going through large amounts of information, and the things that humans are very good at doing, like thinking about the result of this analysis in a context that considers the ethical implications, the things that the computer might not see, biases that might not be obvious, and that sort of thing.
Jan, in my experience, every time an AI-based solution for any sort of problem is introduced, very often the response from the general public is that the people that have been doing it up until now will lose their jobs. At least that's what we've encountered with the short stories that we've written. So, are we looking at empty newsrooms? Is that what's coming? Are you?
No, I really don't think so. It's just I think journalists will be able to work on more interesting things, focus on really what's important, on analyzing things. But there are like plenty of tasks which are I don't know, like reporting the exact scores in sports or stock markets. So these things, telling whether kind of stock is increasing or decreasing, it's kind of thing which can be fully automated, and it is actually. these days. In some places, including in E15 has this, and colleagues were working on this kind of stock market reporting system. But there's like, I think it's ever increasing amount of data which people and in particular journalists have to process. So I also think about assistive technologies, as Logan said, because I think we can greatly improve on these. So my idea is to develop tools which will have journalists, not to replace them. And if in future there is so there is this holy grail of general AI, so no one knows whether it's possible, and I think it will take some time before we get there, if it's possible. So maybe after that people might be scared of, but even though
So we have some time. That's
we have
good to
some,
know.
yeah, there is still some time, but at least at this point I think it's really about assistive technologies, about tools, about helping to process lots of data, to find patterns in those data, so you can really find interesting correlations between what happens all around the globe. So this is I think interesting. So I think it's really about getting journalists to even more interesting places.
My last question before we get to the last round of your questions is there a dream project for you? Is there a dream application of either AI or a story to chase that you'd be excited to try? And it doesn't really have to even be reasonable or real. It just has to be a dream. So Logan, do you have anything for us?
Well, I'll stick with the theme of being prosaic and talk about something that's not just a dream, but something that we're starting to work on this year, which I'm really excited about applying some of the multilingual document embedding models to that I discussed earlier. And that is a project to look across the European Union at how conspiratorial belief in the QAnon conspiracy theory has been spreading into Europe and European politics. And we find a lot of social media channels that are posting translated versions of things like viral QAnon posts that started in the United States. And I think some of these new natural language processing AI systems and algorithms have a lot of potential in making it easier to track how this misinformation and conspiratorial thinking is spreading across countries and language communities that might have previously been more separate than they are today.
And when can we look forward to this, roughly?
This will be an ongoing project, but we hope to publish several articles about it throughout 2022.
Magic. Jan, do you have anything?
For me, this time, because I'm lately really dealing with NLP, this which I don't like and would like to change, is this dependence on large players like Google and such large companies which are able to really train these huge language models, which most of things we build upon these. So it will be either like another new methods how to train these in-house, so higher efficiency, or like skip in available computational power. Because these super models are really only doable by these huge companies these days.
Magic. Thank you so much. So now we have some time for questions, if there are any questions left for us. Yes, we have quite a few. Another take on AI as a new frontier. Logan, do you think journalists have the skills and data necessary to interrogate and write about real algorithms?
Short answer is yes. I think in most journalistic contexts, journalists rely on conversations and information taken from experts that they're talking with to understand a event or a situation and then communicate that to the general public. So this is yes, but only if they're talking to the people that have the ability to kind of communicate some of the concerns that might be currently academic or technical or a little bit harder to discover by a person with more generalist skills. And I think journalists also have, even perhaps more so than people that are deeper in AI, the right ability to, for instance, if we're talking about AI bias, have conversations and interviews with people who have been affected by issues of AI bias directly. And then that gives us an even better opportunity to put these interrogations of algorithms into a context that the general public can make sense of.
Thank you so much. Jan, I wonder about your collaboration with social scientists. Was it hard to find a common language, or did you understand each other instantly?
Well, not instantly, but it turns out that we work in academia, so we cooperate. We from CTU cooperate with people from Faculty of Social Sciences, and the thing is that I actually prepared a series of lectures, something like machine learning without mathematics, where I go through the basic things. Topic. So I explain things like what are these models, how do data set look like, and why we need what's training data and these kind of things. So we get into discussions, and then I think this really helps. I'm really pro this interdomain like cooperation. So we even have one student of journalism, and she helps us basically to evaluate what we do. So she evaluates the data we collect in detail. She evaluates how our models behave from the user perspective, and I feel this is really important thing. And I must say, I was maybe I was lucky, but I must say, yeah, definitely we needed to explain them. Our collaborators from the social scientists from the social science domain, we need to explain them certain things, and they needed to explain other things to us. But well, it took several meetings, but I think we're kind of dealing without any problems these days, and this cooperation, I think it will prevail, and it will be better and better. So I me personally, I'm satisfied with how it works. I heard some news from other colleagues that it's really hard to explain things to people who don't know anything about mathematics and etc. Yeah, for certain problems, this might be really as that, but consider me lucky. From my
Thank you so
experience,
much.
I was really okay with that.
Thank you. Logan, last question for you. Do you think you would be doing journalism if you lived 100 years ago, or are you in it for the modern tools and classic journalism doesn't excite you?
This is an interesting question because I'm actually not a journalist by background or by training. I'm a technologist, I would say, first and foremost, that got into working in journalism and with journalists as a way of trying to use my technological skills to work in a field that would accomplish some social good and try to progress values that I personally care about, like democracy and freedom of expression. I think classic journalism would excite me in that sense, in that it's still about, you know, holding truth to power and power to account, and I think that will hopefully continue to be true with or without new technological innovation.
I feel that this was the absolutely perfect segue into the closing of the panel that we have here at hand. If there's no other questions, thank you so much for being a fantastic audience. Now, allow for just a few brief words towards the end. I think we promised at the very beginning that we were going to find and point at the value in tech-driven journalism, and I think we did just that. We've come to the conclusion that artificial intelligence has an absolutely sealed place in its role in journalism as assistive technology, as something that is there to help journalists bring the stories to light, and the journalists are there to make the results of artificial intelligence relevant to the human experience, which is something that is not necessarily replicable. This was Logan Williams of Bellingcat and Deandre Hall, a research analyst, and two fantastic guests. Thank you so much for taking the time. If any of you have any more questions, I'm sure you can send an email somewhere, or you can continue to write, and we'll see if we can check up on some more questions later on. Nonetheless, it's been great. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.